So I think of all the poems that we have looked at, this is probably one of the most straightforward. And interestingly enough, one of the things I'm going to point out about it is that Percy Bysshe Shelley was a romantic poet, which means he lived in the era of Romanticism, which ran in the early 1800s. And the Romantics were very big on ignoring rules in favor of what they were saying. So if you were to try, I think when you did your scavenger hunt, you noticed that the rhyme scheme is completely whack. So he's not sticking to any one set rhyme scheme. And I don't even think we can call it, I'm not sure what we would call it. So we have A, B, and that's if we count frown and stone as a slant rhyme. We would have A again. Now we'd have C. I think this would be D. We'd go back to whatever red was. And you can tell that this is not stable. So instead of me trying to eyeball this and remember the letters, look at your sheet. It should have notes from your scavenger hunt as to what the rhyme scheme is. And there are actually two slant rhymes. Your scavenger hunt says one, but appear and despair and bear, they kind of sound like different sounds, but they're close enough that would be considered slant, and so would frown and stone. So you have a wackadoo rhyme scheme. But of all the poems, this one has a narrative element that most of you understand fairly intrinsically. So I met a traveler from an antique land, and then who said, so you have a frame narrator, and then you have a speaker who pretty much talks through the rest of the poem, and that speaker quotes Ozymandias. So I met a traveler from an antique land who said, two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. So the image you have here is that you have these big, enormous legs, but they don't have a trunk. So however big this statue was, you only have the legs of it. Near them, on the sand, half sunk into the sand, a shattered visage lies, and this is another word for like a face, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things. So there's a very minor juxtaposition in these lines. The statue had passions, the king that it's based on had passions, but yet now this is lifeless. And the other thing is this: we have a sneer of cold command. So someone who's used to being in charge, and yet his face is basically lying half buried in the sand, right? Which that's right, stamped on these lifeless things. There's also the hand that mocked them, probably the people, the heart that fed. And on the pedestal, these words appear: my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. If we were in English class and I was making you do this, I'd make you put single quotes there, right? But that's the king speaking. And then the speaker who said, continues, nothing beside remains. So look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. And here's another quick juxtaposition. He's saying, look at how amazing I am. Look at all the things I've done. And yet he's out in the middle of a vast desert. His statue is broken, and there's nothing else. The sand has leveled it. So round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sand stretch far away. And many of you could understand this fairly simply. It's probably one of the most straightforward poems that we have. And the Romantics were very big on nature, and they did not like big cities. They didn't like industrialization. They felt like those things tended to dehumanize people. Particularly, they were writing during the advent of the Industrial Revolution, and they were seeing what the smoke and the factory work was doing to people, and they very much prized the individual, the common person. And you'll notice that a lot of the poetry we've looked at has been dedicated to women who've married upward, and they have these, they were high stature, they were aristocrats. The Romantics were sort of the first group to sort of promote the common man. And so it's not surprising then that Shelley portrays this king, which I believe is based on an actual Egyptian king. I'd have to look that up for you. I should have probably done that before I made this recording. But that said, he bases this, and what he's saying is, look, you aristocrats who think you're all that great, nature takes control again. You will not last forever the way you think you do. And on one hand, that can be somewhat depressing, but on the other, he's saying that when you have these terrible people, eventually the sands of time will erase them as well. So, I mean, it is depressing for us to think about being forgotten. The good news is that so are all the wicked and the nasty people. So I think most of you understood the theme there, that we can think that we're doing incredible things. We can be arrogant about it, and yet nothing lasts forever. So that's a little bit of an insight into that poem, which I think most of you probably grasp really well. And we like this. This is your narrative poem. You have more of a narrative here than any other, and yet that narrative is really just essentially a dramatic monologue. So that is the bit on Ozymandias.